I gave them everything, and they gave me a seat by the bathroom. No name card, no welcome, just a folding chair beside a leaking pipe and a trash can full of used diapers. I watched my grandson's baptism through a cracked door, while the woman who stole my place called herself family. I didn't cry. I planned. No name tag, no flower, no kind usher saying, "Right this way, ma'am." Just a creased napkin tossed across the cushion, like someone had changed their mind halfway through pretending I mattered. I stood there for a few seconds, my hands tightening around my purse, that old beige leather one Sean gave me back in college when he still called me Mama. I held it like a life raft while voices echoed from the hall beyond, clinking glasses, polite laughter, hymns swelling from the organ. The baptism hadn't even started yet, and I already knew this day wasn't for me. A woman in a headset scurried past me, glanced, then winced like I was something she'd forgotten to clean up. They said you're supposed to wait back here. Sorry. We're a little tight on space up front. Tight on space? I paid for the goddamn chairs. I didn't argue, just smiled, like all women are taught to do when they've been slapped without a hand. I sat. The metal groaned under me like even the chair didn't want me there. From my angle, I could just barely make out the edge of the altar through a gap in the swinging door. There they were, Rachel's parents, front and center, wrapped in coordinated pastels, beaming like they'd birthed the Messiah. Sean stood between them, stiff and perfect, adjusting his cuffs while Rachel cradled the baby like a prize. My grandson, my blood, being presented to God, surrounded by everyone but me. The smell of antiseptic and bathroom hand soap curled into my nose. Someone flushed behind the wall. A child's voice whined. A faucet dripped. I looked down at my dress. Soft lavender, elegant, understated. I had spent hours finding it, simple enough not to outshine the parents, dignified enough to be seen. But I wasn't seen. Not really. I was staged, like a prop in a backstage room. And what killed me most, what made my throat tighten, was that this wasn't a mistake. This wasn't some oversight. This was intentional. There was no space for me in the photos. No seat for me among the family. No line in the program that read, "With gratitude to Elaine, who raised him alone." Not even a whisper of my name. I had carried him through nights when he couldn't breathe, sat by hospital beds, made grilled cheese in the shape of stars just to get him to eat after his dad left. I had buried my dreams so he could chase his. And now here I was, next to a goddamn air freshener and a flickering light bulb. My fingers trembled in my lap. Not from rage. Not yet. This was something colder, something that settled into your bones when you realized you weren't just forgotten. You were erased. Someone from catering passed by, pushing a cart of mini quiches. He glanced at me and hesitated, like maybe I looked like I belonged out there, not here. But he said nothing. That's the trick with humiliation. It doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just lets you sit. And I did. I sat. While the music played. While the baby cried. While they toasted to family. My legs ached, my back stiffened, but I stayed, rooted in that insult like a monument no one wanted to look at, because I hoped, maybe Sean would look back. Just once. Turn his head. Catch my eye. Smile. He didn't, not during the ceremony, not during the photos, not even as they passed by for lunch, plates in hand, my food budget funding every bite. And still, I said nothing. I clutched that purse like a secret, and I smiled like a woman who hadn't just been gutted in silence, because I had taught myself not to make scenes, because I had spent years apologizing for existing too loudly. But that day, something inside me changed, not loudly, quietly, like a beam shifting inside the house. You don't see the damage at first, but eventually the whole place leans. They didn't want me in the room. So I started thinking about the rooms I'd built, and the ones I still had the keys to. I wasn't always the woman who stayed silent. Once I was the kind who fought for the last slice of cake, who talked back to teachers, who walked out on men who tried to shrink me. Then I became a mother, and every sharp edge I ever had got dulled by duty. Because being a single mom in my 20s meant there was no room for softness, but also no room for strength that made people uncomfortable. I had to become invisible, the kind of woman people thank quietly but never invite anywhere. And I did it. I played that role so well it stuck to my skin. I wiped other people's messes, smiled through overdraft fees, and told Sean that everything was fine, even when I couldn't afford my own medication. Because that's what mothers do. They lie for their children's peace. But there were days I came close to breaking. One winter, Sean was 6. I was working 3 jobs. The heater broke. I was boiling water on the stove just to keep our apartment warm. He coughed all night from the cold. I sat beside him, wrapped in a coat, whispering stories I made up on the spot. At 3 a.m., I called Mrs. Potts, our old neighbor on the second floor. She was almost 80 and half deaf, but she came down, dragging her space heater behind her like a warrior. "You don't need to do this alone," she said, pushing it into the room. Even God rested on the 7th day. That night I slept on the floor next to Sean, warm for the first time in weeks. I never forgot that kindness. That's what legacy is. It's not about who shares your blood, it's about who shows up when you're drowning. And now, after all those nights, all those years, my son sat me beside a trash bin to watch my grandson's baptism through a crack in a door. Rachel's mother wore a pale blue dress, pearls glinting like false modesty. She cried during the reading, actual tears, and when Sean handed her the baby, she held him like a victory, like she had labored and pushed and stitched her own soul into him. She hadn't. But I had. I saw it then, how carefully she'd orchestrated this. Her hands were all over it, even though she'd never claimed responsibility. That was her talent. She didn't need to banish me outright. All she had to do was suggest a better aesthetic, a more polished lineup, a seating plan that made sense. And Sean, he agreed. Maybe not with words, but with silence. He knew. I asked him weeks before the event, "Where will I sit?" He said, "Don't worry, Mom. You'll be included." Included like an afterthought, like a necessary expense, not a presence to honor. And I let it happen. That's what haunts me most. I saw it coming and still walked into it, like a lamb into a trap. Back in the hallway, someone opened a window. Cold air brushed against my cheek. It felt cleaner than the warmth of the room. I closed my eyes and remembered the smell of baby powder, the way Sean used to nestle into my neck after a bath. I had kept one, of his old onesies in a drawer for years, yellow with tiny embroidered stars. I nearly threw it out last month but couldn't. Now I knew why. Because someday I'd need proof that I once meant something to him, that I was once his whole world. Now I was a woman near a trash can, holding her breath to keep from shaking. A waiter walked by. He hesitated, then gently asked, "Would you like some water?" I nodded. He brought it back in a real glass, not plastic. That small gesture nearly undid me. I whispered, "Thank you." And he smiled, eyes kind. Funny how strangers can see you clearer than your own blood. I took out my notepad, the one I always carried, the one Sean used to draw monsters in when he was little. And I began to write, not a revenge list, a clarity list. Line 1, stop funding dreams you're not welcome in. Line 2, stop showing up for people who only value your absence. Line 3, start remembering who you were before silence felt safer than truth. I paused, looked at the scribble of dried marinara on my dress hem, laughed, just a breath through my nose. Then added, Line 4, rewrite the will. That one sat heavy in the air. Legacy isn't about biology. It's about presence, about sacrifice, about truth. And if Sean couldn't remember who held him through every fever, every heartbreak, every damned science fair meltdown, then maybe he didn't deserve to inherit anything but the silence he gave me. Because inheritance isn't a right, it's a reflection. And I no longer saw myself in his reflection. I didn't go straight home after the baptism. I went back to the hotel room I had booked for the weekend, a modest room with beige walls and a view of the parking lot. It smelled like old carpet cleaner and artificial lavender. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it for a long moment. The silence hit me like a wave. Not the comforting kind, the kind that makes your ears ring, like you've just stepped out of a loud concert and suddenly realize you're alone. My purse dropped to the floor, my heels came off. My feet were swollen, red at the edges. I'd worn those shoes hoping to look elegant, proper, respectable, whatever that means anymore. I peeled off the dress, now wrinkled and stained with some kind of dip from the appetizer tray. It fell to the carpet in a puddle of mauve regret. I stood there in my slip, staring at the mirror. Who is that woman? The one who used to be fiery, funny, loud. The one who raised a boy with nothing but grit and expired coupons. She looked tired. Not just from the day, from the years, from being invisible in every photo she paid for. I washed my face, took off the makeup Rachel once complimented. So natural, I love that you're not trying too hard. Translation, know your place. I sat on the edge of the bed, reached for my tablet, and opened the baptism spreadsheet. Every transaction, every vendor, every note Rachel had suggested with those backhanded niceties. And then, with a steady hand and a still heart, I started typing. Dear Whitestone Florals, please cancel Sunday's delivery. The remaining balance will not be processed. Dear Jubilee Jazz Ensemble, due to changes in the event structure, your second set will not be required. Thank you. Dear Poorhouse Bar Services, kindly cancel the post-reception cocktail service. Do not process any further charges. 3 emails. 3 deletions. I didn't scream. I didn't warn. I didn't even reread them. I just hit send. Then I turned off my notifications. Silence returned, but this time it felt like mine. I lay back on the stiff hotel mattress and stared at the ceiling. The fan above creaked with every turn. I imagined it unhinging, falling, slicing the room in two. It didn't. The texts started around midnight. First Sean. Hey Mom, are you okay? Then Rachel. Margaret, we're getting weird messages from the vendors. Can you explain? Then a string of calls, one after another. I didn't answer. Not because I was being cruel, because I had nothing left to say that wouldn't tear me apart. I opened my notes app and began another list. What I taught him that he forgot? Say thank you, look people in the eye, never let someone eat alone at a party, always save a seat for your mother. I stared at that last one until the letters blurred. Then I closed the app and turned off the light. The next morning, I brewed hotel coffee. Bitter, burnt, exactly what I needed. I sipped it slowly, sitting cross-legged on the bed in a robe that smelled like bleach. My phone buzzed again. A voicemail from Sean. Mom, what happened? Everyone's freaking out. The brunch is off. The bar's gone. The band left early. People are asking questions. Please don't do this. Please don't do this? As if I hadn't been done first, I didn't listen to the rest. I grabbed a pen and wrote on hotel stationery. Sometimes the only way to be heard is to go silent. I packed up my things with the kind of care one uses when leaving a house they know they're never coming back to. The dress went into a plastic bag. The shoes, into the trash. I checked out without speaking. The concierge asked if everything had been satisfactory. I smiled and said, perfect. Driving home, the roads blurred. Not from tears, from clarity. I wasn't mourning. I was molting. Every mile I put between me and that reception hall, I shed another layer of shame. When I got home, I fed the cat, unpacked, and opened the drawer in my nightstand, the one with the old photos and cards. Sean's first drawing. A stick figure of him and me labeled me and Mama in wobbly crayon. I stared at it for a long time, not angry, not hurt, just done. I slipped it into an envelope, wrote one word on the front, history, then placed it in a shoebox labeled, not your inheritance. Because from now on, my inheritance would be peace, and no one gets a piece of that unless they earn it. When I came home, the house felt so quiet it was almost like it was trying to tell me something. I closed the door behind me gently, like if I made too much noise, it would all fall apart. The air smelled like it always did, a bit of lavender from the laundry soap I use, and something else I couldn't quite name. Maybe time, maybe memories. I didn't turn on the lights. I just walked straight to the bedroom and opened the nightstand drawer. Inside was that old red folder I hadn't looked at in years. It was buried under bills, old photos, and things I kept meaning to sort through but never did. I don't know what pulled me to it. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was that quiet voice inside us that whispers when something big is about to happen. I sat on the bed, pulled it open, and there it was. An envelope, yellowed and sealed, with a postmark from Arizona. I knew right away who it was from. Michael, my ex-husband. Sean's father, in name anyway. The man who walked out on us like it was nothing. That envelope had been sitting there since after his funeral. I hadn't had the heart to open it back then. I figured it was just more of the same. Sorry this, sorry that. But now, after everything that happened at the wedding, after sitting in that kitchen like I didn't matter, After watching my son laugh and celebrate and never once look for me, I opened it. Michael's handwriting hadn't changed. It was messy and rushed like he always was. The first line hit me like a brick. "Margaret, Sean isn't your biological son." I stopped breathing for a second. Then I read the rest. Michael said he had been with someone before me, a girl named Emily. She got pregnant, didn't want the baby, and came to him scared and desperate. He took the baby in and told me Sean was ours, a mistake from before we got married. I believed him because I wanted to. I believed him because I loved that little boy the minute I saw him. I raised Sean. I held him through every fever, made every birthday cake, stayed up late to help with homework, and worked extra shifts so he could go on school trips. I gave him everything, and I never, not once, thought of him as anything other than my son. And now I knew the truth. And it didn't change how much I loved him, but it made the way he treated me hurt even more. I looked at that letter for a long time. Then I set it down on the kitchen counter and pinned it there with a fridge magnet. I didn't want to hide it. I didn't want to throw it away. I just wanted it to be seen, like I wanted to be seen. Then I walked around the house taking down the photos, not angrily, just quietly, carefully. These were my memories, my story. I put them in a box, labeled it Sean, and slid it into the closet. I stood in the hallway, hands empty, and breathed. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could finally hear my own thoughts again. I had spent so many years being someone's mother, someone's wife, someone's helper, that I forgot who Margaret was. Well, now I remembered. And even though Sean wasn't mine by blood, he had been mine in every way that counted. I gave him my whole heart, and that will always be true. But I was done giving it to people who didn't see its worth. The next morning I woke up earlier than usual, not because I had errands or responsibilities, but because the sunlight looked especially soft through the curtains, like the day itself was inviting me to start fresh. I pulled on a sweater, padded barefoot into the kitchen, and made a pot of coffee. Not for guests, not to accompany chores, but just for me. The smell of the coffee brought back memories, not all of them bad, just full. I poured it into my favorite mug, the chipped one with the blue flowers, and sat by the kitchen window listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator, the birds chirping outside, and my own steady breathing. That day, I didn't feel the weight I had been carrying for months, maybe longer. Something had lifted, not all the way, but enough that I could finally see clearly again. I took out a yellow notepad from the drawer. Instead of writing a list of chores or bills to pay, I wrote names. Not people I had to see or check on, people I wanted around me, people who had, in their own quiet ways, held me up over the years. Claire from the hospital, who used to leave little notes in my locker during rough weeks. Mr. Henderson, my next-door neighbor, who always shoveled my driveway and never once expected anything back. Dina from the bookstore, who saved the newest mystery paperbacks for me and asked about my week like she really cared. 6 names in total. Not many, but enough. Enough for one small dinner. I spent the afternoon cleaning, not in the frantic, performative way I used to when guests were coming over, but gently, like I was tending to a space that had finally become mine. I wiped down counters, rearranged the photos on the hallway shelf, lit a candle that smelled like pine and vanilla. Then I cooked. Not anything fancy. Lemon butter pasta, garlic roasted vegetables, and a peach cobbler I hadn't baked since Sean was a teenager. I played music, Nora Jones, Van Morrison, a little Billie Holiday, and let the house fill up with scents and sounds that felt like home. At 6, the first knock came. Claire, with a bottle of red wine and a wide smile. Then Mr. Henderson with a store-bought pie and a story about the time he got stuck in his garage for 2 hours. Dina arrived with a small bouquet and a laugh that filled the living room before she even stepped fully inside. We sat around my dining table, the same one that had once been cluttered with textbooks and utility bills, and we talked. We shared stories. We passed plates. We laughed, not politely, but deep from our bellies. At some point, Claire raised a glass. "To Margaret," she said, for finally taking her seat at the head of her own table. My throat caught a little, but I smiled and lifted my glass. "To friends who see you even when you forget to see yourself." The clinking of the glasses felt like music. Later, after the dishes were drying on the rack and the laughter had faded into memory, I stood in the quiet of my home and felt complete. Not because anything had been fixed, not because I had found closure, But because I had chosen joy, I had chosen presence. Then came the knock. It was soft, hesitant, almost like the person on the other side was hoping I wasn't home. But I knew who it was. I opened the door, and there he was. Sean, my son. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept properly in days. The confidence I had seen on his wedding day was gone, replaced with something rawer, something real. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice quiet. "Hi, Sean." He looked past me into the house at the still warm glow of the candle, the empty wine glasses, the leftovers packed neatly on the counter. "You had people over?" "I did." He shifted uncomfortably. "Can I come in?" I nodded, stepping aside. He walked in like he didn't quite know what to do with his hands. He glanced around, noticing the missing photos from the mantel, the rearranged furniture, the calm in the air. "The house looks different." "It feels different," I said. He sat down on the edge of the couch, his hands resting on his knees. "I didn't know about the letter," he started. "Emily didn't tell me. I found out from your post, the check, I mean, and the messages. People were talking." I said nothing. "I guess I just assumed, I don't know, that everything would be fine again after the wedding. That you'd understand. That you'd come around. That I'd stay quiet." He looked down. "Yeah, I guess." I sat in the armchair across from him. "I did understand, Sean. I understood that I was never really part of the picture. And that's okay now. I'm not angry about the letter. I'm not even angry about the wedding anymore. But I am done being erased." He swallowed hard. "You're still my mom." "I'll always be the one who raised you," I said. "But now, I'm also the one who has to raise myself." He looked at me with something like grief, but not for me, for the version of me he had always taken for granted. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I know. But that doesn't change everything." We sat in silence. I didn't rush to fill it. Finally, he stood. "I should go." I nodded. He walked to the door, then paused. "You always said I was your whole world." "You were," I replied. "But now I'm building a world where I'm in the center, too." He looked like he wanted to say something else, but he didn't. He just opened the door and left. I stood there for a moment, listening to the quiet. It didn't feel empty. It felt earned. I returned to the kitchen, packed away the rest of the cobbler, and turned off the lights. And when I finally crawled into bed, I didn't check my phone. I didn't worry about tomorrow. I just pulled the blanket up to my chin, closed my eyes, and let sleep come, soft and deep. For the first time in years, I didn't dream about being left out. I dreamed about sitting at my own table, surrounded by light. I didn't expect peace to feel so unfamiliar. The morning after Sean's visit, I woke not to tension or dread, but to an odd stillness, like the house had exhaled after years of holding its breath. The silence didn't press against my chest the way it used to. It simply sat with me, like an old friend I had forgotten. I didn't rush to check my phone, didn't skim the news. I just stayed in bed for a while, staring at the ceiling and letting myself feel whatever rose up. It wasn't anger, it wasn't sadness either. It was something deeper, quieter. Maybe contentment, maybe something I didn't yet have a word for. When I finally stepped into the kitchen, I brewed coffee with both hands steady. No tremble, no hesitation. I buttered a slice of toast, then sat at the table and ate with both elbows on the surface, a small rebellion against the years I spent making meals standing up. And then, without ceremony, I opened the red folder again. Not out of masochism, not because I needed another wound, but because I knew there was something else in it, something I'd felt hiding just beneath the layers of old documents and folded corners. There it was. One more letter. No envelope, just a thin sheet folded in half. I unfolded it, and even before reading, I knew it was him again. Michael. His slanted handwriting filled the page like a final confession. "Margaret, if you've come this far, you deserve the whole truth. Daniel wasn't just someone else's child. He was never meant to be yours. Emily left him with me. She begged me to give him up, to let the state take over. She said she couldn't do it. I couldn't either. Not that way. So I lied. I told you he was ours. I told you it was a mistake from before we were married. And you believed me. You mothered a stranger's child. You gave him everything. And he became yours in every way but name. You didn't know, but you showed up. You stayed. That's the kind of woman you are. I couldn't take this with me to the grave. I had to let you know, not because you need it, but because you earned it. I read the letter once, then again, and instead of breaking me, it built me. I sat very still, holding that piece of paper like a relic. Not a wound, not any more. Daniel wasn't mine by blood, he wasn't even mine by accident. He was a child placed in my arms through deceit and abandonment, and still, I had loved him. With my whole life. With every shift worked, every scraped knee kissed, every bedtime story and whispered prayer, there is something powerful in knowing the truth doesn't undo the love. It just clarifies it. I spent the rest of that morning tending to my space, not in the frenzied, distraction-seeking way I used to clean, but calmly. I opened windows, let air in. Shook out the rugs, rearranged books on the shelf. I removed the wedding invitation from the fridge door. And I baked. A peach pie, like the one Daniel loved as a boy. I didn't bake it for him. I baked it for the woman who stayed up all night sewing his Halloween costumes, who went without so he could go to summer camp. I baked it for me. While the pie cooled, I began boxing up the past. School photos, handmade cards, his drawings. I wasn't throwing them out. I was simply moving them. Reclaiming space, rewriting the rules of my own home. I kept one photo, though. It was tucked inside a cookbook, a snapshot of me holding Daniel on his 5th birthday. His arms wrapped around my neck, frosting on his nose, my smile wide and tired. That smile wasn't fake. That moment was real. I framed it and placed it on the bedside table. Later that evening, I lit a candle, lavender this time, and took a bath with the window cracked open. I listened to the distant sound of kids playing somewhere down the street. Their laughter didn't make me ache. It reminded me that life keeps going. Joy keeps existing, even when yours has been tested. After dinner, a small plate of pasta and a glass of wine, I sat with my journal. I hadn't written in weeks, maybe months. But tonight, the words came easily. I am not less of a mother because he forgot me. I am not less of a woman because they erased me. I am still here, and I am still whole. The phone buzzed once, then twice. I ignored it. Then came a message from Sean. Emily's upset about the Facebook post, says it made us look bad. We're dealing with enough already. Can you just take it down? I didn't respond. I didn't delete it. Sometimes silence is the only boundary people respect. The next day I went to the craft store. I bought a new tablecloth, sunflower yellow with blue trim, and a pack of linen napkins. Not for a party, not for guests, but for the quiet dinners I'd host for myself. I even bought paint samples. I was thinking of repainting the kitchen walls. Something softer, something new. While browsing the home aisle, I ran into an older woman who complimented my scarf. We talked for 10 minutes about fabric and gardening. We didn't exchange names, but when we parted, she smiled and said, I hope you get exactly what you want next. I wanted to believe I would. That evening, I wrote letters of my own, not to Sean, not to Emily, but to the people who had shown up when it mattered. To Claire, to Mr. Henderson, to Dina. Just a few lines, each one ending with, thank you for seeing me. No one ever tells you that after years of being needed, it takes time to learn how to want again. But I was learning. And that learning, quiet, slow, uncelebrated, felt more meaningful than any toast or thank you speech I never received. I went to bed early that night, no tightness in my chest, no questions hanging in the dark. Just me. Just breath. Just peace. Not because they made it right, but because I finally chose to stop chasing their version of love and started honoring mine. The knock on the door wasn't loud, but it was steady. 3 quiet taps, a pause, then one more, like he was waiting me out. I stood in the hallway, still barefoot, the soft cotton of my robe brushing against my ankles. Through the frosted glass, I saw him. Daniel. He looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I was just standing taller now. I opened the door slowly. He didn't speak right away. Hi, Mom, he said, voice tight. His eyes flicked over me like he was checking for signs. Anger, softness, something he could latch onto. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just stepped aside. Come in. He walked past me like he was entering a museum, careful not to touch anything. The living room was clean. The air smelled like lemon and rosemary. The mantel was bare. Every photo, every frame packed away. He noticed. Where's all the stuff? He asked. In a box, I said. I didn't offer to show him where. He sat down on the couch like a guest in someone else's home, hands on his knees looking down. "I don't know where to start," he said. "Then don't start with excuses," I replied. His mouth opened, then closed. He nodded. "Emily's upset. About the Facebook post. About everything, really." "I'm sure she is," I said. He looked at me, something between frustration and guilt twisting on his face. "She said it made us look bad. You made yourselves look bad. I just stopped hiding it." He swallowed hard. "I didn't mean for it to be like that. I didn't think—" "You didn't think. That's exactly the problem." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The quiet between us said more than shouting ever could. He looked at the floor. "I messed up," he said. "You didn't just mess up. You erased me," I said. "You let them seat me by the kitchen. You watched them make speeches, take photos, dance, toast, and you said nothing. Not a word. Not even a glance." "I didn't think you'd care about that stuff," he muttered. I laughed. Not cruelly, just tired. "You didn't think I'd care about being treated like I didn't exist? About being left out of my own son's wedding? I raised you, Daniel. I was there for every scraped knee, every fever, every night you couldn't sleep because of those nightmares. And you didn't think I'd care?" He didn't answer. I stood, walked to the hallway closet, pulled out the old cardboard box. I set it down on the coffee table and removed one envelope. Thick, cream-colored, printed with a date, a venue, a floral motif. "Your wedding invitation," I said. Nowhere on it was I mentioned. Not even as the host. I pulled out another item, a photo of him and Emily under the arch I paid for. "And this? This wasn't even sent to me. I saw it on your cousin's Instagram." He looked away. I added one more item. The letter. His father's handwriting. The second one. He flinched. "You read it?" I did. He held my gaze. "So, you know, I know everything now. That you weren't mine. Not by blood, not even by marriage. But I raised you anyway. I chose you. I stayed. And you let someone else decide that I belonged in the kitchen." "I didn't know she would do that," he said quietly. "I thought she'd put you at a table with family." "Then you didn't ask. You didn't check. You just let it happen." He stood, pacing now. I was overwhelmed. The wedding was crazy. There was so much going on. There always is. That's what life is. But it's in those moments, when things are messy, that we show who matters to us. He stopped pacing. "I don't know how to fix this." "You don't," I said. He blinked. "What?" "You don't fix this with an apology or a Facebook post or a brunch. This isn't about fixing. This is about knowing what you broke." He sat back down, eyes wet. "You always said I was your whole world." I nodded. "And now I'm finally mine." He didn't speak after that, just sat there, quiet, like a boy again. But I wasn't the same woman who used to swoop in and make everything better. That part of me had been retired. I handed him the box. "These are yours," I said. "Receipts, invitations, all the proof that I gave everything I had." He hesitated, then took it. He stood at the door again, this time with the weight of something real in his arms. "Will I see you again?" he asked. "That's up to you," I said. "But if you do, it won't be the same." He left, and I didn't cry. I walked back into my kitchen, poured myself a cup of tea, and sat in the chair by the window where the afternoon sun warmed the floor. It was quiet, but it wasn't lonely, because I was no longer waiting to be seen. I had seen myself, and that, finally, was enough. The house smelled like rosemary and lemon, warm and clean, like something had finally been lifted. The kitchen buzzed softly, not with chaos, not with tension, but with life. My life. Real, ordinary, beautiful. Claire was the first to arrive, arms full of grocery bags, even though I told her she didn't need to bring anything. "Old habits," she said with a wink. Then came Dina from the bookstore, holding a pie that looked like it came straight out of a magazine. Mr. Henderson followed, his cheeks already flushed from the walk over, holding a bottle of wine and a folded napkin with a cookie in it. "Don't ask," he said with a laugh. We gathered in the living room, where the fireplace flickered low and the radio played jazz, just loud enough to hum through the room. I had lit candles, nothing fancy, just ones I'd found in the back of the cabinet. The table was set with mismatched plates and cloth napkins I'd ironed that morning. I hadn't done it for show. I'd done it for me. Because I wanted to. This wasn't a dinner party, it was something else. Something more intimate, a reclaiming. Every dish on the table had been cooked in peace. No pressure, no performance, just love. We ate slowly between stories and second helpings. Someone made a joke about dating in your 60s. Someone else admitted to stealing flowers from a neighbor's yard. And somewhere between laughter and wine refills, I realized, this is what it feels like to be seen. To be wanted, not needed, not tolerated, chosen. After dessert, Claire raised her glass. To Margaret, she said, for reminding us that it's never too late to choose your seat at the table. I looked around. Eyes met mine, kind, honest, tearful in the best way. I stood, my hands steady. To the women who stayed quiet for too long, I said. To the mothers who gave everything and were told it still wasn't enough. To the ones who were asked to sit in the kitchen after building the damn house. May we never do it again. Glasses clinked. Someone said, Amen. Later that night, after the dishes were done and the guests had gone, I stood barefoot in the kitchen, watching the candlelight flicker across the clean countertops. There was a time I would have washed the floor right then and there, just to keep busy, just to keep from feeling. But I didn't need to fill the silence anymore. I let it be. I made tea, wrapped myself in a blanket, and sat by the window. The garden outside was dark, but I knew the roses were still blooming. I didn't need proof. I just believed it. The next morning I woke up to birdsong and the smell of coffee I had prepped the night before. I poured myself a cup, sat at the same table where I used to write checks for school field trips and birthday parties, and opened my journal. I am not less because they left me out. I am not invisible because they forgot me. I am not empty because they took what I gave. I am whole because I stayed. There were no missed calls from Daniel, no messages from Emily, no apologies waiting for me. And for the first time, I wasn't waiting either. I put on music, Motown this time, and danced around the kitchen while I scrambled eggs. I laughed when I spilled a little salt. I wore my favorite sweater, the one with the frayed cuffs. I watered my plants and replanted the basil. I took a walk and waved at a neighbor I didn't know very well, just because. That afternoon, I passed by a family having a picnic in the park. A little boy was chasing bubbles, giggling like the world was brand new. His mom was sitting on the blanket, hair pulled back, a juice box in one hand, a camera in the other. I watched for a moment, not with envy, but with gratitude. I had lived that. I had survived that. I had given that. And now I was here. Not broken, not bitter, just beginning. When I got home, I made myself a sandwich. I used the good mustard, the kind I used to save for guests. I sat at my table, and ate slowly. Every bite was mine, and before I finished, I raised my glass of water in a silent toast. To the women like me, the quiet ones, the forgotten ones, the strong ones, the soft ones, the ones who kept giving until they remembered they were allowed to keep something for themselves. May we never sit in the kitchen again, unless it's at the head of our own table. It had been 3 weeks since the wedding. 3 quiet weeks. I had fallen into a rhythm I hadn't known I needed. Early mornings with warm tea, long walks around the neighborhood where I waved at familiar faces, and quiet evenings at my kitchen table where the light spilled soft and golden across the blue and sunflower tablecloth. The phone had stopped ringing, and the silence no longer pressed on my chest like it had in the beginning. Instead, it gave me space. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, he came back. The knock was soft but steady, like it had weight behind it. I stood in the hallway, heart calm, not racing. I peeked through the window. It was Daniel, no Emily, just him. He looked older somehow. Or maybe I was just seeing him differently now. His shoulders were tense, but his eyes, they weren't angry. They weren't defensive. They were unsure, like a boy again, not a man trying to perform someone else's story. I opened the door but didn't say anything. He gave a hesitant smile. "Hi, Mom." I nodded, stepping aside. "Come in." The house smelled like cinnamon and lemon cleaner. I had just finished wiping down the kitchen counters and baking a batch of muffins, a habit I'd rediscovered lately. Baking just for the smell of it. Daniel sat on the same couch he used to nap on after school. He looked around, eyes scanning the walls where his photos used to be, the mantel now bare except for a vase of wildflowers, and one small frame quote, "You're allowed to begin again." He cleared his throat. I don't know how to start." "Then don't start. Just say what you came to say," I said, gently but firmly. He hesitated, then pulled something out of his pocket, a small object wrapped in tissue. "I found this in one of the moving boxes," he said, handing it to me. I unwrapped it slowly. It was the little plastic lion from his first birthday cake, faded now, but unmistakable. My fingers trembled, but I said nothing. "You kept it," he said, voice barely audible. "Of course I did. I kept all of it." There was a silence. Then he spoke again. "I was wrong. About the wedding. About everything. I let her make decisions I should have questioned. I didn't protect you. I didn't even think to. That's the worst part. I didn't think." I watched him closely. He wasn't performing now. He was crumbling. I wanted it to be perfect. And I thought you'd understand. That you'd be okay with it because you always are. But I see now. I see how much I erased you. I nodded slowly. "You did erase me, Daniel. Not just at the wedding, but long before that. I kept showing up, kept giving, kept making room for you, even when you offered none for me." His eyes watered. "I don't know how to fix it." "That's because you can't. Not in the way you think. This isn't about fixing, it's about recognizing. About not repeating. About choosing differently from now on." He sat back, overwhelmed. "I miss you," he said softly. "I miss how we used to talk, how we used to be." I smiled, a small, sad smile. "So do I, but that version of us, it doesn't exist anymore, and I'm not going to pretend it does just to make things easier for you." He nodded. "So where does that leave us?" I took a deep breath. "It leaves us here, in this moment, with truth between us for the first time in a long time, but I'm not going back to being your fallback, Daniel. I'm not going to shrink so you can grow." He didn't argue, just looked down at his hands. "I don't expect you to, Mom. I needed to say I'm sorry. Really sorry. And I needed to know if maybe, one day, we could find something new." I considered that. Not the old relationship, but a new one. One where I wasn't invisible. "Maybe," I said. "But it'll be on different terms, and it'll take time. You don't get to walk back in and expect the kitchen to smell like muffins and forgiveness." He gave a small laugh, eyes shining with something between relief and sorrow. "I get that. Thank you for not slamming the door in my face." I stood up, walked to the small drawer in the hallway, took out a plain box tied with twine, handed it to him. "What's this?" "Everything I kept from your childhood. Your drawings, your birthday cards, even that old blanket you carried around for too long. It's yours now. I've carried it long enough." He took it gently, cradling it like something sacred. "Thank you," he whispered. I walked him to the door. He turned before stepping out. "Can I call you sometime, just to talk?" "Maybe," I said again, "but don't expect me to always answer." He nodded. "Fair." I watched as he walked to his car. This time I didn't cry. I didn't ache. I didn't hope for more than what was real. Because here's what I knew. Love is not erasure, and forgiveness is not forgetting. And I could be both soft and strong. He had been my whole world. And now, finally, I was mine. It had been nearly 2 months since that quiet conversation at my door. Daniel hadn't called again, and I hadn't expected him to. Not because I didn't care anymore, but because I had learned that healing doesn't always mean returning. Sometimes, healing is just standing still long enough to hear your own voice again. And my voice was growing stronger. It started simply, a list. Names scribbled in the margins of an old notebook, people who had been kind without asking anything in return. Claire from the ER, who used to sneak little candies into my scrubs. Dina from the bookstore, who always remembered what genre I liked. Mr. Henderson, who never failed to wave when I watered the lawn. People who saw me. I called it my light list, names of those who brought light instead of shadows. One day, I called them. "Dinner at my place," I said. Nothing fancy, just food, wine, and stories. They all said yes. The days leading up to that dinner felt different than preparing for the wedding had. There was no pressure, No perfect photos to stage, no floral arch or seating charts, just grocery shopping with a cart full of fresh herbs and pasta, just folding napkins while humming to a Nina Simone playlist. I set the table for 6, each plate a little mismatched, each glass a little different. I liked it that way now, nothing too perfect, just real. When the doorbell rang at 6, I was barefoot, apron dusted with flour, laughter already bubbling in my chest. Claire brought a bottle of red wine and a pie she'd made from scratch. Dina had a bouquet of wildflowers. Mr. Henderson brought a loaf of bread still warm from his oven. We filled the small space with voices and the clinking of dishes, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a mother or a widow or a ghost in the kitchen. I felt like a woman, a friend, a host. The pasta was slightly overcooked. The salad had too much dressing, but no one minded. We ate like we were starved for company, passing bowls back and forth, telling stories, finishing each other's sentences like old friends do. At one point, Dina leaned over and whispered, "You know, this is the best meal I've had in months. Not because of the food, because of the feeling." That made my throat catch a little. I smiled, pressing my fingers around the stem of my glass. Later, as the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, we moved to the backyard, sat in folding chairs with throw blankets on our laps. I strung lights across the fence, not because I had to, but because I wanted the night to feel like something worth remembering. We talked about books, about bad dates, about small joys, about music and travel, and how none of us knew what the next chapter looked like, but we were willing to write it anyway. Toward the end of the evening, Claire raised her glass. "To Elaine," she said, "for showing us that it's never too late to create your own circle." They clinked glasses. I laughed, and for the first time in so long, it didn't feel like laughter meant to hide pain. It felt like the beginning of something. Not a new family, but a new foundation. The table stayed messy, with crumbs and half-empty glasses, and I didn't rush to clean it, because the mess meant life was being lived, and I was no longer the afterthought at someone else's celebration. I was the host of my own. The last to leave was Mr. Henderson. He gave me a hug at the door. "You know," he said, "your boy's a fool if he doesn't see what he's missing. But lucky for us, you're still here." I smiled, touched his arm gently. "I'm here now, and that's enough." When the door closed behind him, I stood in the quiet and looked around at the plates, the laughter still echoing faintly in the walls, and I whispered to myself, "Welcome home." It was a Wednesday afternoon when the letter arrived. Not from Daniel, not from anyone I expected. Just a plain envelope with a return address I didn't recognize. Inside was a folded note and a photo. The note was short, just a few sentences written in careful cursive. "Dear Elaine, I don't know if you remember me, but I was at the wedding. I was sitting near the back, across from the bar. I saw what happened. I saw where you were seated. I just wanted you to know. I noticed. And I thought it was wrong. Warmly, Jessica, Emily's cousin." Attached to the note was a photo someone had taken during the wedding toast. It showed the whole reception hall, tables decorated in white and gold, fairy lights strung across the beams, people laughing and raising glasses. In the far corner, near the kitchen doors, was me, blurry but unmistakable. My soft mauve dress, my hands folded politely on my lap, a ghost in the background. I stared at that image for a long time. It was the only picture I had from that day. And yet, it said everything. I didn't cry. Instead, I placed the note and the photo in a small wooden box I kept in the closet. A box where I'd begun to store pieces of my truth. Not bitterness, not proof for revenge, just evidence that I had lived through it and come out the other side. That afternoon, I took out my journal, the one I hadn't touched in years. I opened to a fresh page and wrote at the top, "Things I've forgiven but won't forget." I listed them slowly. Being called dramatic when I spoke up. Being asked to be less visible for someone else's comfort. Having to make excuses for other people's silence. Watching someone I raised pretend I was just part of the scenery. Each sentence steadied me, like stacking bricks to build a wall I didn't need to hide behind, but one that defined my space. In the following days, I began to decorate again. Not to please anyone else, just to create a space that reflected me. I painted one wall a pale yellow, hung up a framed quote that read, "You do not owe anyone the parts of you they chose to ignore." And in the hallway, where Daniel's graduation photo used to hang, I placed a new frame. Inside was a handwritten note to myself. "You are not invisible. You never were. They just never looked hard enough. That week, I also made a decision. I sat down at my desk and wrote a letter. Not to Daniel, not to Emily, to myself. Dear Elaine, you've done enough. You've carried others long past the point of your own breaking. You've been quiet for too long. You've earned rest, joy, laughter. You've earned space to be. Not as someone's mother, someone's wife, someone's reliable silence, but as Elaine, whole, worthy, seen, love, me. I sealed the letter in an envelope and placed it beside my bed. A reminder for any day I forgot. Forgiveness, I was learning, wasn't about letting others off the hook. It was about freeing myself from needing an apology that may never come. And even if Daniel never saw me the way I hoped he would, I could still see myself. Fully, clearly, and that, at last, was enough. Fall settled in quietly, the kind of fall where the air turns crisp overnight and the leaves paint the sidewalks in shades of orange and red. I pulled my sweaters out from the back of the closet, swapped my sandals for worn leather boots, and baked apple pie even when no one was coming over. Because I liked the smell, because I deserved small joys. One morning, I was sweeping the porch when a familiar car pulled up. Daniel? Again. He stepped out, not with flowers or guilt, but with something that surprised me more. A photo album. I stood still, broom in hand, watching as he walked toward me slowly. Hi, he said. You're early, I replied, glancing at the sun barely over the trees. He offered a small smile. Didn't want to be late. I wasn't sure if you'd let me in. I didn't answer, just opened the door. The album was thick, covered in soft navy cloth. He handed it to me like a peace offering. I went through everything, he said. All the boxes you gave me. I didn't realize how much you'd kept, how much I forgot. I sat on the couch and opened it. Inside were scanned copies of the cards I wrote him over the years, photos of the cakes I baked, a note I wrote in Sharpie. First day of kindergarten, you were so brave. I cried in the car. He sat beside me, watching my fingers trail the edges of each page. I'm not asking you to forget, he said. I'm just asking if I can remember better, from now on. I looked at him, really looked. He wasn't trying to win. He was trying to understand. Why now? I asked. He exhaled slowly. Because it's finally quiet enough in my life to hear your voice again. And because Emily left. I blinked. I'm sorry. Don't be. It wasn't right. And I think a part of me knew that all along. There was silence. Not bitter, not tense. Just honest. She said I'd always be looking backward. He added. That I was still trying to make sense of a boy who wanted a mother more than a wedding. I closed the album. You don't need to explain, I said. We're both trying to make peace with the same thing. How much we gave and how little we asked for in return. He nodded. We sat there for a long time, the album between us, the past stitched into the pages. Eventually, I got up and poured us each a cup of tea, cinnamon spice, his favorite. He smiled when I handed it to him. You remembered? I remember everything, I said quietly. We sipped in silence. He didn't ask to stay. I didn't offer. But for the first time in years, we were sitting in the same room without history choking the air between us. Before he left, he paused at the door. I want to come to dinner, the next one, if that's okay. I considered it, then nodded. We'll see. But thank you for asking. He looked relieved, almost boyish. As he drove away, I stood at the window, holding the album. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't a switch. It was a path. And today we'd just taken the first step. I looked at the photos one more time, not to mourn what was lost, but to honor what had survived. Me, and maybe, just maybe, us too. The next dinner came on a cool Saturday in late October. I set the table the same way I always did. Mismatched plates, cloth napkins, the good silverware. A butternut squash soup simmered on the stove, and a pecan pie cooled on the windowsill. The string lights twinkled across the backyard fence. At 6, the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on my apron and opened it. Daniel stood there, alone. No flowers, no gifts, just himself, and 2 bottles of sparkling apple cider. Thought it might be better than wine, he said. Something we both can drink. I smiled and stepped aside. Come in. The others arrived soon after: Claire, Dina, Mr. Henderson, and Nurse Janet. Warm hugs, familiar laughter. Daniel looked slightly out of place at first, like someone who had missed too many chapters of a story and wasn't sure if he was still part of the plot. But we made room for him. The dinner was slow, thoughtful. Stories flowed between bites. Daniel listened more than he spoke. Occasionally he laughed, low and quiet. He asked Dina about her bookstore, helped Claire carry dishes to the sink, and then, as we were clearing dessert plates, he turned to me. "Mom," he paused, corrected himself. "Elaine, can I say something?" Everyone turned. The room quieted. He stood a little awkwardly, holding his glass of cider. "I don't know how to undo the past. I don't know how to make up for what I didn't see or what I let happen. But I want to thank you. Not just for tonight. For all of it. For raising me. For staying. For loving me when I didn't make it easy." He looked around the table. "And thank you to all of you for making space for someone who's still learning how to show up." A pause. Then Mr. Henderson clapped first, then Claire, then the whole room. Daniel sat down looking like he didn't expect applause. I reached over, touched his hand gently. "That's a start," I said. He smiled, eyes glossy. And for the first time in a long time, I saw the boy I used to chase around the backyard with a garden hose. After everyone left, Daniel lingered. He helped dry dishes, folded the dish towels without being asked. We worked in silence, the comfortable kind. When everything was clean and put away, he turned to me. "I know I'm not owed anything," he said, "but I hope this, us, can keep growing." I nodded. "It can, but it has to grow different this time, on equal ground." "I want that," he said softly. At the door he hugged me, not the quick, polite hug of a holiday visit, but the kind that says, "I'm here, really here." When he left, I sat in the quiet again, not lonely, just still. And in that stillness, I felt something shift. Not closure, not a neat ending, but momentum and hope. Winter came early that year. Snow dusted the rooftops before Thanksgiving. I spent my mornings sipping coffee by the window, wrapped in a blanket, watching birds gather on the bare branches. There was a peace to the stillness, the kind that only comes after a storm has passed. I didn't hear from Emily. I didn't expect to. Daniel called once a week now. Sometimes we talked about nothing. Sometimes we talked about everything. He never pushed. I never held back. It wasn't perfect. It was real. One morning, I pulled out an old recorder from a drawer in the study, the kind journalists used in the 90s. I replaced the batteries, hit record, and began to speak. This is for anyone who's ever been asked to sit quietly at the edge of their own life. My voice was steady, not rehearsed, just true. To the women who paid for everything, but got asked to wear beige and sit behind the buffet table. To the mothers who were good enough to raise a man, but not good enough to be in the wedding photos. To the givers, the fixers, the silent strength. This is for us. I paused, then smiled into the quiet hum of the machine. They don't get to write our stories anymore. Later that day, I typed it up and printed a copy, folded it, placed it inside the red file folder where everything else lived now. Old letters, receipts, truths I refused to forget. That night, I hosted dinner again, the last one before Christmas. The table glowed with candlelight. Mismatched plates, pie still warm, music low. The air smelled of cinnamon and garlic and rosemary. Daniel was there. So was Claire, Dina, Mr. Henderson, Janet. This time, we toasted to small things. Fresh starts, bad first dates, burned pie crust that still tasted good. And then, just as the laughter quieted and everyone was refilling their glasses, Claire raised hers. "To Elaine," she said, "for reminding us all that it's never too late to take your seat at the head of your own table." Everyone raised their glasses. I raised mine too, and said, clearly, "To the mothers who stayed quiet too long, to the women who gave everything and were told it wasn't enough, to the ones who built the house and got asked to sit in the kitchen, may we never sit down again unless it's at the head of our own table." Glasses clinked, someone let out a cheer, and I sat down, not behind a door, not as an afterthought, not as a ghost in someone else's story, in my chair, at my table, with my people. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was waiting to be seen. I was home, and I was whole.